My name is Jessie Veenstra, and pleased to welcome you here to our Dig In Seed Grant informational webinar. My pronouns are she, her, and I welcome all of you to update your names, introduce yourselves in the chat, maybe share where you're joining from. I am joining you today from the traditional and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'm joined by my colleagues here, Carolyn Webb. Carolyn wants to give a little wave. She's going to be helping us with the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. We are going to do a bit of a presentation, and then Carolyn's going to keep track of questions as they come in through the chat. You can also raise your hands when we get into the Q&A. And also want to just welcome Florence Plourde from Équiterre, our partners in Quebec, and she'll be helping to facilitate today's meeting, as well as our French webinar taking place on Thursday this week at the same time. All right, so with that, I think we will dive right in. As soon as I figure out how to advance my slides, here we go. So I do just want to, as I mentioned, I'm joining from the unceded lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, which is where Farm to Cafeteria Canada's head office is located. And our team is located across the diverse traditional and unceded lands of folks of many nations, Inuit, Métis, and First Nations. And I want to acknowledge that it is Truth and Reconciliation Week. So I hope that all of you are finding some opportunities to engage in education and learning with respect to truth and reconciliation, maybe taking part in some events happening in your own community. And if you are looking for any resources, I will just encourage you, I'll put in the chat here, there's some great resources, particularly for folks in or resources for educators for K-12. There's some live events happening this week that the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation is putting on, and they've also got some great recordings and videos as well. Okay, so for today's webinar, we are going to cover kind of the first 4 items on the list here fairly quickly. I'll give a brief overview of the grants, as well as a little bit of introduction into like who Farm to Cafeteria Canada is for those that are new, and the farm to school approach. And then otherwise, really this time is for yourselves. If you have questions, we'll be keeping track of those in the chat and addressing them after we do a little bit of a presentation. So first of all, I will just introduce Farm to Cafeteria Canada. We've been around for about 12 years now. We started in 2011, and we have a vision for food systems that nourish people and the planet. We are a national charitable organization, and we refer to ourselves as a partnership-based organization because we work with partners all across the country, really to kind of take a national approach in the work that we do, bringing folks together and sharing, but really kind of rooted in place and in particular our local food systems. And with that, our work is really to help transform how food is experienced, learned, and celebrated in all schools across Canada. And we do that in a variety of different ways, kind of 4 key ways, one of which is to provide funding supports to schools and school communities. And so of course, we're here to talk about one of our grant programs today. And we do all of this through what we refer to as a farm to school or local food to school approach. And for those that are new, this is really a lens through which we view school food. And it kind of has these 3 pieces of a puzzle that we like to think of that work together. And so they are providing access to healthy, ideally as locally sourced as possible, food in schools, as well as opportunities for hands-on learning about food, whether that's kind of skills in the kitchen or understanding about food systems that are around us. And with that is this kind of community partner connection, which really kind of bridges these other 2 pieces of the puzzle together, connections to folks who are in our community and working in our food systems, So it looks different in every school and every community, but common to the approach are these three pieces. And I will just note that we do use the term local food to school interchangeably. So we encourage schools to kind of use the term that resonates with themselves the most, whether that's farm to school, local food to school, sea to school, forest to school. There's many kind of different iterations to recognize that our food comes to our schools and our homes and our tables from many different sources, including farms, but much more. This slide is really just a bit more of a deeper dive into what I just shared. You can find more information about the farm to school approach on our website if you're interested to dig into that. And then this is just sort of another little representation that shows some of those many different ways that farm to school can come to life. And so with our grants, that's one of the things that we're hoping to inspire and encourage in all of you is to explore what some of those different ways can look like and what that means in your communities. And so these are just kind of some of the examples based on our experience and what we've heard that kind of speak to these different aspects of the approach. With that, the reason we're all here today is to chat about the Dig In Seed grants. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the purpose of these grants. Really, these are about helping to make small improvements in school food environments, and that can really be by addressing kind of any of those elements. A great way to look at it is addressing the different puzzle pieces of the farm to school approach. These are a new grant stream that we're offering and pleased to be offering that in partnership with the Shad Foundation. And these are in response to what we've heard from schools. For those that are familiar with our Canada grant stream, they tend to be larger, kind of longer term grants for schools that have a fair bit of activity underway or that are interested in taking on a larger project. And we've heard feedback in the last couple of years that schools are looking for some slightly smaller grants, shorter in term, and also slightly less kind of commitment and funding. And so these grants are really to help bridge that gap and are ideal for schools that are looking to get started or have a smaller kind of contained project that they're looking to get off the ground. So with that, they are valued anywhere between 500 and 3,000 and intended to be kind of administered this school year. So the application window will close October 27th, and then we'll be looking to get the grants awarded to schools before the end of the calendar year so that then schools can kind of implement their activities in the winter and spring of this year. Hopefully, ideally living on past that, but that there'll be some sort of kind of tangible activity or progress in your project, whatever that might be, by the end of the school year. In terms of eligibility, I should say that the grants are to be provided directly to school communities. So not necessarily NGOs or other folks working in community, although they can definitely play an important role in supporting applicants. And I know many of you may be joining from community partners, which is great. But I will also note they are for folks who are in basically all provinces and territories except for BC. With that, I'm going to wager to guess that we probably don't have anyone on the line from BC. But if there are questions about that, I'm happy to answer it. We do hope to open the grants up in future years to BC just for this year. It didn't quite work out, but I will note that Farm to School BC, our partners, do have their own grant stream that will be opening up for applications in the next week or two. And they're kind of for similar style of projects and value. So they're a great opportunity if anyone is joining from BC. I think those are the main details about eligibility. So with that, I'm going to chat a little bit about readiness for grants. So I mentioned already that these are designed for kind of smaller projects or for folks looking to get started. So with that, we have designed them specifically to be quite flexible. And so there's not really a lot in terms of prerequisites that we are asking for schools to have. So hopefully that helps to make them a little bit more accessible. That being said, there are a few things to keep in mind in preparing applications and considering what activities you might want to take on. So first of all, a great way, as I mentioned, is to think about that puzzle piece of the farm to school approach that I mentioned earlier. We will be looking for what's proposed in applicants to connect to at least one of those pieces. So something that supports the food service in your school, that supports hands-on food literacy or food systems literacy activities, and then ideally some connection to the school community and helping to just foster strengthening those connections to the local food system. And so with that there is really kind of a desire and willingness amongst the school community to really kind of embrace opportunities for students to have access to food literacy activities and improved school food environment. The other key thing is that as much as we love the excitement of engaged in community members, whether it's parents or educators, those are all, and other community volunteers, really important members of a school team. Without the support of leadership at the school, it can be really hard in our experience for activities to really thrive. So we do ask for everybody to just confirm that if you're not the principal or vice principal that's submitting the application, that they are aware of the project and supportive of it. Their support is really important. And so we will be asking people in the application just to confirm that. And the next piece is engagement of community partners. This actually isn't a requirement, but we've put it here as something just to think about. It's really helpful to think about who in your community can support the work and the project underway. And for our Canada Grants program, we do actually have this as a requirement. And so we put it here because it's never too soon to start developing those relationships, and also just to think about who already is in your network that might be excited and be able to contribute to your project. These could be staff members, members of parent council, community partners, farmers, chefs. There's all sorts of folks that can be great community partners and help to make projects a lot of fun and bring some great ideas and support. The last two elements, we will be looking for school proposals that reflect, and sorry, there is a question we asked folks to share how the activities that you're proposing will celebrate the diversity of your student population. So considering the traditions and cultures and food celebrations of the students that make up your and school community and their families. Just kind of considering ways that your proposed activities can celebrate that or make sure that there's space to honor and celebrate those different traditions. As well as that activities are, I'm flying ahead here, that activities are open and accessible to as many students as possible. So we want as many students who want to participate to be able to benefit from the activities proposed. And so we will just ask for a bit of input or feedback on how you will go about that. And that will kind of help inform our screening process for the grants. Budget and work plan. I would say the big take home from this slide is that we do not require you to fill out any Excel sheets or upload anything in too much detail. We know that can be a lot of work, and for small projects, we really just want to be able to support your enthusiasm that you have for the projects you want to get underway. So you aren't required to submit a formal budget or work plan for the grants. That being said, we do ask that you still explain what you'll be using the funds for, and share a little bit about what impact you're hoping to achieve with your proposed projects and the activities that will help to achieve those impacts. I think the main thing to note is that the funding cannot go toward use for staff salary or food costs, as much as these are really important aspects and we know are really important to fund. That with the amount of grants, it doesn't go too far toward either of these. So our hope is to support projects and equipment and things that can kind of live on and help to build capacity for the school. With that, some examples of activities and expenses, and this is by no means exhausted. Just some examples that we've come up with to share, and you're welcome to share your own ideas and examples in the chat as well. But some of the most common things we hear folks are needing funding for is a diversity of kitchen equipment and utensils. So that can be anything from like cutting boards and pots and pans, or sometimes even dishes, because to not have to be using disposable plates and bowls and things, for instance. It can be things like blenders, lots and lots of interest in like smoothies and soups and preserving equipment. So lots of ideas and examples there. As well as equally diverse number of tools and equipment that can support growing activities, whether that's indoor or outdoors. Special events, so celebrating food events and hosting events around food literacy and serving food in the school community. Field trips, guest speakers and educators. Lots of other ideas, definitely not an exhaustive list, but just some things to get you thinking about. And we'll put some links in the chat as well, but there's some great stories of inspiration available on our website. So if you're looking to kind of see what some past grant recipients and other schools have done, it's a good source of inspiration that we can share as well. Getting to the end here, I'll just kind of share a little bit about the application process. So I think fairly straightforward, although this is our first time with these grants, so we welcome feedback on the process as well. But kind of 3 key steps. So we do encourage you to review the grant guidelines and as well as the grant application template. So we have prepared the template. You're welcome to use it to prepare responses if you like, because the online application does not allow you to come back to it. So just make sure you have enough time to sit down and fill that out at once. It doesn't take too long, I don't think, but it's helpful to use the template if you want to record those responses. And if not, even just to read through. And we do have some additional kind of tips and feedback in the template around what kind of information that we're looking for in some of the more kind of long answer questions, of which there's only a handful. So again, we've tried to keep that pretty simple, but encourage you to look through the template. And then last but not least, submit your application through the online form by the end of the day, midnight, I guess, Pacific time on October 27th. So with that, just kind of a summary of key dates. I mentioned October 27th is the deadline to submit. We will be looking to inform applicants by the start of December so that they can kind of get funds and get started or on activities early in the new year. We will be looking for some sort of tangible activities to have taken place by the end of the school year. But that's okay if you've still got more planned into the following school year, that's fine too. We will just ask you to share a grant experience survey by the end of June before taking the break for the summer. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and we can have a little bit of a chat here. We'll address some of the questions that have come in. You can feel free to raise your hand and share your question verbally. If you don't want to do that, you're welcome to send a note in the chat, either privately or for the group to see, and we'll work our way through the questions. So with that, I will stop sharing. And here we go. And maybe I'll just ask Carolyn because I haven't been able to keep an eye on the chat the whole way through if there's any questions that have come through.
No questions yet, no.
Questions yet, okay. Okay, Mai has a hand raised.
Hi there. The grant that I would like to help one of the schools apply for is for a vertical tower garden. Is that, and we would probably max out the 3,000 because each of them is 1,500. So is that something that is doable?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely would be an eligible expense. It's considered garden equipment or growing equipment. So absolutely, that's an eligible expense. And then we would just ask, I would encourage you to share a little bit about kind of some of the activities that you hoped to be able to do with the towers. And yeah, kind of why that's exciting and important for your school. But absolutely, that's an eligible expense.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Can it be initiated? So, a question of can this be initiated by the community instead of the school? I would say that yes, as long as the school is on board and excited by it. They really need to kind of not just have their buy-in, but take ownership and really want to be able to bring that opportunity to their school. But I would say that we definitely recognize the importance and the role that community partners play and in being an important capacity and resource for schools to be able to often do much of this work, just because it can otherwise be off the side of teachers' desks and things. So if it's something that's welcome and excited by the school, then absolutely the community partner can initiate it and provide support. Again, we'll just ask to confirm before submitting the application that the school principal is supportive and on board for that. And I will just say that the funds would then go directly to the school. So that's the only thing to note, is that the funds do need to go to the school. But community partners can apply on behalf, for sure. And then I see we've got a couple chats that came, or sorry, a couple questions that came in on the chat. So I have taken note of those. I'll get to them in a moment, but I see Alejandra has a question.
Yes, hi, thanks. A couple of questions. One is for schools that already have started building the capacity for a garden program, but don't have the time where teachers don't have time to offer programming around the garden during school time. Can the funds be used towards having workshops from outside, organizations or businesses that can come and do that work?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding correctly, I would say yes. So if the school has a space, we know that yeah, it can be challenging sometimes for educators to be the ones also animating that space. So yeah, I'd say it's a great way to make sure that that's getting utilized. So schools can go towards like guest speakers. So that can be bringing people in or taking students elsewhere if there's another space. So yeah, if you've got folks that can bring workshops and hopefully that will maybe inspire the educators too to get excited and maybe learn how they can help to use and support the space.
And my second question is for programming that the school would like to happen beyond school time, so not during regular school hours where students and their families are invited to attend, say like gardening sessions and things like that. Is that something that the grant would consider? Or does it need to be for programming specifically during school time?
Yeah, that's definitely would be eligible. So it doesn't have to just be during school time. We know that there's lots of great kind of before and after programs. And I think as much as possible, we know that these programs and activities are a great way to kind of create those community connections. So I would see that as being an aspect of that approach is, yeah, engaging families and the broader community is great and encouraged.
Okay. And then the last one is, so if organizations are able to apply for schools on behalf of schools, I think I missed this a little bit. I was getting excited about my questions and I kind of missed your response. But so if organizations are able to support schools in that process and they apply, um, how, I guess, how does that work? That might be a silly question, but
Yeah, no, so from our experience, I would say often, so sometimes it's like a community NGO, or it can be like public health dietitians, or sometimes even just a parent that will kind of gather information from the school, ensure that they're kind of have an understanding of what the school wants to do, or maybe bring some ideas for the school, and then they would help the schools to submit the application. But then the funds would then go directly to the school. So the kind of grant agreement would be with the school, just because we want to make sure that the funds go as much as possible to that school.
yeah.
That being said, I mean, funds can be used towards honoraria. So sometimes what schools will do is if that community partner is helping to facilitate workshops, or really just to help to put the program in place, if they want to dedicate a small portion of the budget to provide an honorarium to the person who's helping to lead that, or to the organization, then that would be an eligible expense. But yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the great questions. And I'm going to see here, I'm just going to look back at the question. Can applications be for more than one idea? Great question. So yeah, absolutely. I think if there's multiple activities, or like smaller things that a grant might support, absolutely, you can submit for a variety of ideas. I think just thinking through what budget might be necessary for those activities, and if the grant can sort of reasonably support multiple activities. But I would say like a good example is, you might want to apply for, say, a little bit of the funds would go towards like some equipment, and then maybe a small portion toward like a workshop or a field trip. I think when we ask about the activities and the impact that the grant would have, it would be good just to kind of help to explain your vision a little bit as to how those multiple ideas maybe kind of work together and complement each other, just so that we can have a bit of an understanding of kind of how you see that rolling out. But yeah, absolutely. As much as you feel like you can do within the budget, we encourage lots of ideas. But that being said, if that's not to say too, if you have like one core idea and you're looking for a smaller amount of funds, then that's totally fine and encouraged too. How many grants do we give out? So the number of grants is actually, that's a great question. It will depend a little bit on the amounts that schools request. And so we expect that there will be at least 25 grants. And we're kind of breaking it down into regions. So the way that the grants will be awarded is there will be 5 grants for 5 regions. So those regions are going to be the Prairies, so Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Then we've got 5 grants for Ontario, 5 grants in Quebec, 5 grants for the Atlantic provinces, and then 5 for the territories. So and because this is our first time offering these grants, we hope to offer more in the future. But we are kind of breaking it down in those regions just to try to make it as equitable as possible. And so in terms of the selection process, we will be screening the grants for eligibility. And then from there, we will kind of draw at random just so that everybody who has who meets the eligibility criteria has an opportunity, and then we'll validate those selections. And that's how the grants will be awarded. Do we need an invoice? So from the company or equipment, or just the total amount request? So I think you can let me know if I'm understanding this correctly, but is the question that, like, do we need to see proof of the cost? So for instance, if for a grow tower that we need to see the invoice, I think so no, we don't need to see the invoice. We won't ask kind of schools to submit that, but we will, yeah, basically it's up to the school to judiciously distribute those funds, and we take your word that that's what it costs, but we won't ask you to kind of submit receipts and things like that. But we do encourage, depending on if you are looking for equipment, there's lots of different companies out there, see what kind of quotes you can get. It's always good to shop around a little bit, and also encourage schools to see what kind of discount you can maybe get as being for a school or nonprofit. If they have rates for schools, often I find companies, especially providing like growing equipment and that, are happy to support schools' efforts. And so we just encourage that. And then maybe that gives you a little bit extra in your budget to maybe do a few of the other little activities too. Okay, let's see, a couple more questions. Can funds be used for curriculum materials to study the science of growing food, such as soil, water, air, and genetically modified organisms? So yeah, if there's, so it doesn't have to be physical. Well, it doesn't have to be physical equipment, although I guess curriculum resources could also be physical. But yeah, absolutely. If there's access to curriculum or certain content or courses that you want to be able to bring to your school, those are definitely eligible expenses, and great if you can make those curriculum connections. And we always love to hear about what kind of resources and tools you're using. So, and know that other schools like to learn from that information too. So if you do that, please feel free to share with us, and we'll pass that information along. Do we accept French grant applications? Absolutely. Yeah, so our website has 2 sides to the French and English. And so I'll just put a link to the French webpage here. And there is a French application form. Oops. There we go. So that's the French side of you can find all of the materials and resources in French, the guidelines, the template, everything, and feel free to share or submit in French. And I know some people are having to head back to class. It's always tricky with these webinars, hosting at a time of day that works for everybody in the country, whether it's school hours or lunch hour or heading into dinner for some. So if you need to leave.
Lucy, I thought of one other question from one of them. Can a school submit more than one application if they want?
Oh, great question, Carolyn.
Thank you. I might say no if we're doing the random thing, that would, we saw it an odd way, but.
Yeah, I would say I really encourage you to put your strongest foot forward, because if we do receive, I guess in theory people could submit to, the system isn't going to stop anyone from submitting multiple applications, but yeah, I would encourage you to pick what you think is like your strongest idea and what you're most passionate about, and feel like you can make happen, and to put that forward, because otherwise it might just kind of like confuse our team a little bit, and also it decreases the odds. It adds more to the pool. So yeah. So the question is, if a school is working on a larger project, like building a greenhouse that would be more than the grant amount, is it possible to still request some funds to put it toward the equipment without completing the whole project in the timeline? So yes, I would say you can submit for a portion of a larger project. I would just encourage you to kind of, one thing that we do want to make sure is that the grant itself can lead to some sort of tangible outputs within the time frame. So maybe there's some funds that can go towards that larger project, but with some more contained kind of programming that happens within the grant term, that can still kind of build on that larger project. I know it's oftentimes schools have many things on the go, and that we are looking to multiple sources to be able to fund these larger projects. So totally appreciate that. So I would say it's definitely still eligible. Just make it kind of clear how the grant can maybe contribute to some contained tangible outcomes within the time period, maybe as like a sub project of that larger project. Okay. I'm just going to also put a link to our resource center here. If anyone is looking for ideas or resources, or you can hear some tips from past grant recipients and types of projects that might be useful. So I'll put a link to that in the website, in the chat, and you're welcome to check that out. Otherwise, I'll give maybe another couple minutes here if anyone has any questions, or if our team thinks of any more. Otherwise, we will send everyone on their way. And yeah, best of luck with your application.